Next up is our next speaker is Jawara Alleyne, fashion designer at Jawara, and is an artist, designer, and educator, and has got some. I've seen the website as well, so some fantastic pieces that's been produced there. Jawara, would you like to step up?
So I am Jawara. I'm from the Caribbean. I grew up between Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, and it was very interesting because when I was growing up, sustainability was just a thing that was a part of our everyday lives. It was never something that you really had to think about because it was just everywhere. That's just how our societies were constructed. We recycled, we reused, we reworked, we repurposed things. There was like a huge prevalence of like hand-me-downs within my household and my culture. So it was always something that was just always there. I don't think we ever even really considered it to be sustainable. It was just a way of living that kind of made sense. I also come from a place where every year somebody's entire country kind of gets destroyed because of a hurricane. So it's kind of just ingrained within society that you don't really waste materials. Like things are circular, actually. We've gone through sustainability and a huge discourse about sustainability and come to the point now where actually we started to say, oh, actually, we don't mean sustainability, we mean circularity. But it was always kind of like that, you know, this way of existing that didn't waste things, that always found a second life or a second purpose or a second use for something because we're from a place that that values really, that values the things that we have around us. Okay, so is this gonna work?
No, because it's plugged into mine.
Got it. How can I get it to?
You've got your skin, right?
So, technical issues, of course, as always. Let's try it again. Okay, now it works. Yeah, so it was always a thing that was just a part of my everyday life. So when I moved to London when I was 19 and I started studying fashion design and marketing at LCF. And it was then that I kind of started to build an idea of like who I was, what I do, what my values are, what I stand for, things like that. And it was very interesting because maybe like 2019, okay, 2020, no, I moved here in 2016. And around that time, there was like the start of this dialogue about sustainability. And then there were like a couple of designers that were coming out, like Stella McCartney, for instance, who was like the first real sustainable designer. That really showed that sustainability is not something that needed to look like frumpy. It's something that actually could have value and hold up to the non-sustainable sides of fashion. But I never and I kind of like assessed everything that I did, and I was like, okay, cool. Everything that I do is kind of sustainable, but I'm not gonna really label myself as a sustainable designer because to me, like everybody should be a sustainable designer. So I was like, I'm never gonna call myself a sustainable designer because we all should be. So I started to figure out how to build a story about value systems that sit outside of that didn't sensationalize sustainability, because a lot of what happens is this idea of greenwashing, where as the speaker before me rightly mentioned, like you have a lot of huge companies that just buy into whatever will make them look cool and not really evaluating their core belief systems and really changing those values to reflect what they say that they stand for. So we can go through. I decided that I was not going to call myself a sustainable designer and start to think about like other values, other things that I cared about, other things that I wanted to stand for. Which I think was good because it really allowed me to not focus on the things that we're told that are supposed to be sustainable, like, okay, cool, we can get some sustainable fabrics, great, that's it. So we lock onto that and that's all you need to do. Or sort of identifying one ethical issue and then cool, that's it, that's what we need to do and that's all we need to do. It was really just about changing your entire way of thinking about what sustainability means for you as a person, and eventually, like, if you actually care about it, it will trickle through to everything that you eventually do, because then you start to make decisions and choices based on a really assessed level of value systems that you have. So I started to think about things like politics within my work, things like ethics. You can just go through the presentation is quite long, so it's just here for sort of like a visual representation of what I do. So yeah, then I started to think about things like politics, things like other kind of spaces outside of what I'm told is supposed to be sustainable that I actually value. Things like uplifting the community that I'm from, things like being in charge of your own narrative, things like diversity, which is an extremely important part of, like, we had that huge diversity discourse in fashion. Things looked like it was changing, then nothing really changed. We're still trying to get diversity to actually become a thing. And as a part of that, I also started like a modeling agency with a friend of mine at the end of my BA degree that really just focused on presenting models that we thought that needed to be seen in the industry. So I went through that era of like really instilling and sort of figuring out where my ethics lies as it relates to diversity. Also thinking just about community building and what that really means for me as a person. And I think having this point of view, coming from a place where sustainability wasn't sensationalized and it wasn't about one thing, but really a space where you can just start to question all the things about what you do and how you think about just your entire life, it allowed me to come to a place where I naturally just stumbled upon circularity, and I naturally just found myself in this place where actually it's not just about one thing, but everything should be sustainable. So as it relates to my practice now, I am a designer. I'm showing at London Fashion Week. I'm working with people like Rihanna, Beyonce, Kendrick Lamar, you name it, I've worked with them. And essentially how I approach my work is this place where actually all of these issues matter. When it comes to who I choose to work with, the kind of projects I choose to take, the way that I think about making garments, the way that I think about producing or not producing, I've really come to a point where I can actually very easily make these decisions because it's stuff that I haven't sensationalized, and you find your own honest way to create a world around you that then becomes sustainable. It seems like a huge task, which it is, because sustainability isn't just one thing, it's actually everything. It's all of the ways that we live, it's everything that you think about, it's production, it's the way that you treat people, it's the way that you pay people, it's the way that you talk to people at work. You know, sustainability is just, it's everything that has to do with how we move through this world. And so as it relates to things like production, for instance, I sort of, especially at the beginning of my building my brand, I kind of rejected this idea of creating fashion that presented this idea of like just making stuff in a factory. Because a lot of what happens as well is that you have young designers that are entering into the industry feeling like they have to uphold a standard that huge brands have set that it's just not possible for us to achieve. So I use my work to create something that clearly has been made by hand, but it doesn't mean that it's any less beautiful. It doesn't mean that it's any less impressive. It doesn't mean that it's any less valuable. Actually, what it means is that it's all of those things and more. Things that can be crafted by the hand, things that has to be made on the body, things that just goes outside of the way that we think about clothes, which only since the Industrial Revolution has clothes really been made in this way. And we're presented this idea that this is the only way to be creative, this is the only way to create, this is the only way to have things that are valuable, and it's actually not. You know, people have been making clothes at home since the dawn of time. And I think it's really important to present things that the younger generation can look at and see that actually there's different ways to think about producing, there's different ways to think about creating, and sort of also just being genuinely inspired by other alternative points of views that are coming out within the space of culture. So fashion is many things. It holds a space for obviously the clothes that we need to wear on a daily basis, but a lot of times, and what we don't really talk about, especially now, fashion has come to be a cultural signifier of who we are as people, what our value systems are within the space of culture, what we're communicating as it relates to how we want to inspire people, what we want to say, showing people that there's many different ways to be, to create, to evolve, to become. Yes?
I just have a quick question. So
Yes.
you said to ask.
Yes, yes.
In what sense are these beautiful clothes sustainable? And that's
Okay,
I don't think
so-
I picked that up.
So there's 3 different ways that my work is sustainable. So I work more like an artist rather than a fashion designer. So I've built 3 pillars within my company of research that I really focus on. One is drape work, the other is cut work, and the third is handwork. So within the space of drape work, I've developed this project of working solely with dead stock fabrics and also draping on the body such that the fabric kind of almost remains in its natural form and can be used for multiple purposes. So at the beginning of my career, everything that you kind of see in red was, I essentially went to the dead stock factory and I bought like 20 meters of this red jersey. And every opportunity that came into the brand that allowed me to use that jersey in a way that wasn't about creating a final garment, I tried to use that fabric in this way. So a lot of my work is about draping. Like this dress on the left, for instance, I created it in a way that actually the fabric can just return to its natural form. There's a punk way that I sort of have inbuilt the way that I think about creating garments and creating fashion that seeps through into the work. So one is that a lot of these fabrics can actually just go back to their natural state, but also, I'll come to you, but also a lot of times fashion and clothes actually only need to be seen once. Like a lot of stuff that you see on the red carpet, it will only ever exist in that one moment. Therefore, you don't necessarily need to spend all of these hours, all of these thousands of pounds to create this thing that's only going to be seen once. So how can you create beauty and create value out of something that can actually return to its natural form? The second is cutwork projects. So I run this second brand within my brand called the Entitled Collection. And that collection is solely focused on reworking, repurposing, recreating garments that have lived a life and no longer has a life. So I go to dead stock, secondhand warehouses, whatever, and I buy like tons of t-shirts and I rework them in a way that creates value and in a way that gives an object so much more life. Like one of the problems with, if we're talking about a singular item, that ends up in the landfill is singular use t-shirts. So singular use t-shirts are t-shirts that are printed for like one day, it has a date on it, it's a fundraiser, it's a XYZ. Outside of that context, it doesn't really serve a purpose because you'll never go into a store and see that secondhand thing and think, okay, cool, I need a t-shirt that has this random print on it that doesn't really mean anything to me. So what I do within this project is I find a lot of these garments that has lost its life cycle and I kind of take them, cut them up, rework them in a way that actually gives you a new sense of how to wear clothes that has this kind of life cycle. The third one is handwork, and this is more of a social project that I do within the brand. So I started this dialogue with a friend of mine who runs an NGO in Lebanon where they're supporting these Syrian refugees who it's these women who know how to crochet, who's never really built an industry around it. They've been displaced from their homes, and a lot of times what happens with refugees is that you end up in a place that actually traps you in that cycle because there's no way to build an economy for yourself. There's no way to use your skills in any way because you're kind of trapped in these projects, essentially. So what I've been working on in that regard is finding and identifying places where people are actually genuinely skilled and giving them the opportunity, using the brand, to build an economy for themselves. So that's 3 ways that I specifically target and think about sustainability within the brand.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just going to ask, when you say drape work, does that mean that you're rejecting cut and sew, so you're
Correct.
not having all the way to the other place?
Yes.
Yeah, so
So-
it returns back to the same.
Exactly. So the drape, I mean, there's a lot that comes into it. So that's one thing. The second thing is when you're starting a brand as a young person, tackling production is a huge task. It's very expensive. The information is not really easily sourced, and the minimums are huge. So to actually produce anything, you need to actually make like 100 units, 500 units, 1,000 units, way more than you need, which is also why brands like Burberry, they burn and they destroy so much, because you have to actually make way more than you actually need within these factories in order to get stuff produced. So by thinking about how can I skirt the system and figure out how to create fashion that actually allows me to create value, allows me to work with people like Beyonce, Rihanna, whoever, XYZ, but not have to rely on a wholesale model that traps you into this way of thinking that you can never actually compete in, because even the big brands who have the budget are struggling with this system. So that's one thing that actually drape work allows me to sort of figure out how to create value, how to exist within a space of fashion that doesn't really have to compromise on my creativity and doesn't have to subscribe to the dying system that exists that we all know doesn't really work anymore. So where was I? A lot of, so this is kind of like the sort of, there's this thing that exists within London fashion specifically. I don't think I could do what I do in any other city outside of London, specifically because London is this place that actually allows you to create, honestly, it allows you the space of a history coming through this era of subculture and coming through a punk revolution. Deconstruction started within this city. And deconstruction specifically is a way of approach to fashion that actually is sustainable, but we don't really place it as that because it's become something in and of itself. But huge brands like Merck is actually at the forefront of what fashion needs to become and how fashion can present itself. And what I'm finding is that the students kind of really are sort of confused because it's such a huge umbrella term, sustainability, for just everything, that you ask these students to find a way to create a sustainable project and they really struggle because it's never something that they've had to think about before. So I really think that it's very important to be having this conversation of how can you start ingraining like ideas and thoughts around sustainability that allows you to, from a very young age, pick up and try to sort of figure out and define what does it actually mean, because it doesn't mean anything, it means everything. It means every single thing that happens with the way that we live in a society today and in the future. Whether it's digital fashion, whether it's production, whether it's just designing creative solutions, whether it's just the way that you choose to exist within a workplace, whether it's your own ethics and value systems that can say to your boss, why are we throwing away all of this paper and not actually just recycling it, you know? But you won't be able to get to that point until you start to just have these conversations around sustainability that's ingrained within that space of education and just society from a young age. I think it's really important. This, for instance, is a project that I was working on with a photographer and a stylist, and essentially he wanted to create these draped looks that were going back to the storytelling of Greece and Grecian drapewear, etc. And essentially what I did was that I literally just did all of that on the spot. I just decided on kind of what looks I wanted, designed around how I wanted to drape these looks, and then on set, I literally just did it on the body. And if you go to the next slide, and the next slide, and then at the end of that shoot, we then just reuse all of that same fabric to create this shot, for instance. And any other designer that you would have given that task would have needed to buy, source, and create separate garments for the first section of the story, and then buy, source, create all of these objects for this side of the story, which is just a huge cost that a lot of young designers can't really afford. So I'm always just trying to figure out, because I actually have just thought about sustainability from all angles of what I value, what it means to be me, how can I, every single thing that comes into the brand, I'm always trying to figure out, okay, I can't, this project doesn't really have a budget. How can I think about creating something that's really impactful? It's just a shoe, so I don't need to necessarily make these garments. But I'm not compromising on my creativity. I'm not compromising on the storytelling, which is really what I'm there to do. And I'm figuring out a way to create imagery that sort of fits within my own value system. And then this fabric just then went on to have multiple other lives outside of it. Yeah. So this is another project that I did where, again, I was creating all of these, needed to create all of these looks. And also what it means is that once you start working in this way, you actually start to fulfill briefs in a way more creative way. So for this shoot, I was working with 20 models who had like various different body sizes, various different requirements of what they needed to feel comfortable, and they were all kind of dancing and performing this really rigorous performance over 2 days. What I found when I went, so essentially what I did was I decided again, okay, I need to outfit 20 models, 20 dancers. What can I do and how can I create these looks in a way that actually allows me to create a different look for each one and take into consideration that these girls have different body types. Some of them have boobs, some of them don't, so there's various different considerations that need to come into designing something that actually fits that person, especially for performance. So essentially what I did was just, I cut the strips of fabric that I needed, which was just like a block. And then I decided to use just slits, and on the day I just literally just wrapped them, tied them, knotted them, and with each girl, you know, some felt more comfortable being a bit more exposed, some didn't. But if I designed with a sort of straightforward point of view, the garment, you would just have this issue where you're not really being able to connect with the client, being able to connect with the needs and requirements of all of these women that were on set that in the end actually felt so comfortable to do the routine, which was like super rigorous, and they felt like they were seen, they felt like they were heard, which again is a super important way of thinking about the social sides of like working with people as well. How do you create something that actually does make them feel seen? How do you create something that does make them feel comfortable and not just, I've designed these looks in my studios, here, put them on, you just have to be happy with it, there's nothing we can do about it, you know? Again, another project that took from that same first 20 meters of red jersey that I got that just lived such another life cycle. This was another look that came from that. That was the same project as well. That exists. Again, this was the same yellow jersey from the previous image. This is a nylon that lived multiple different lives. A lot of times what I do is I try to figure out how to design with sustainability in mind. So I'm using a lot of squares, I'm using a lot of blocks that trying to not really change the nature of the fabric too much so that I can actually have this stuff that I can use multiple different times.
So almost component based, where you
Essentially,
create all
yes.
the top components and tie them together or bring them all together.
Yes. And I think it's really just, this was a shoot that I did, which I was commissioned by a stylist. He got all of these vintage dresses that he didn't really like, and he wanted me to come on set and just drape and create new sort of ways of thinking about the body, new ways of thinking about creating something that's actually quite beautiful. But again, it was just a shoot, so it just needed to exist on that day. More of that red jersey. This was a project that, so I collaborate a lot with artists. As a fashion designer, I really try to expand the ways that I think about how fashion can exist within society and tell a story. So I also do a lot of costume design, working with artists who give me the opportunity to create something that actually is sustainable. So again, this was the same theory of draping onto the body and then ensuring that these garments can then live a life beyond that. This was a performance at the Serpentine Gallery 2 or 3 summers ago. Yeah, and it's really just about sort of being able to, again, just fabric that was just draped and wrapped and then was allowed and able to live a life outside of that performance. More of that red jersey, more of that red jersey, more of that red jersey, and more of that red jersey. You know, it's really just about figuring out how, once I kind of like defined like a good sort of way of thinking about sustainability, then you can just creatively just work around and create things that just are genuinely honest to you and who you are. Yeah. More of that with jersey. This was a look that that again, the good thing about the way that I am approaching design as well is that because I'm draping around the body, you really just create these garments on that person. So this look was in one of my shows, and then a stylist pulled it, and I just gave him like extra meters of fabric that he could then himself just wrap and create. This was the Matrix, the last Matrix film. Runway, red carpet, or green carpet event, and I just essentially just worked with him and gave him extra bits of fabric that he could then use, and then when it was returned to me, it was just a square fabric that I could use for something else. Perfect. So that is my last slide. Thank you. One more thing. So I was asked to give a couple of resources, and as I said, like fashion is not just a place where you just make clothes that people wear. Actually, it holds so much more value within society, and it's really important for just all aspects of society to be having this discourse about sustainability in a way that makes sense to them. It's not a one way fits all, subscribe to this way of thinking kind of thing. Like everybody needs to be figuring out their own point of view and what sustainability means to them. So there's a couple of
You're on.
oh, there you go. So there's a couple of places that I look to for inspiration, and I'm just gonna share them with you. These, and then we do. So the first one that I'm going to show you when it comes up is this magazine called Atmos, and they are a magazine that really focuses on sustainable conversations, but they create like editorials, etc. that really more or less focuses a lot on like creating beautiful fashion editorial, and they only exclusively work with sustainable designers. So this is more or less the recent Schiaparelli show. You know, they really just champion and focus on designers that are really doing sustainable projects. Then we have 2 people that are really kind of leading sustainable discourse. One of them is Ursula de Castro, which I think for the young, and this is kind of a lot for you young kids that are here, you really should just like engage with these people's work and follow them, and it really becomes an easier conversation to have when you just see the way that other exciting medias are engaging in this discourse. So Ursula de Castro is somebody to follow. The next one is Dio Kurosawa, and he is a person that works with young designers to really figure out how they can work in a way that's more sustainable. So he links them with factories, he links them with producers, to try and find out how these designers can build a real sustainable manufacturing, for instance.
Sorry, you can't really see it at the back, but is there a way you could like...
I will send this. I will send this.
We'll share all the links and things.
I just want to talk about them so that when you see it, you know like who we're talking about. And the last one is Fantastic 12s, which is it's a pop-up store that again exclusively works with sustainable designers, and yeah, essentially that's what they do. So every 2 months they pop up and they have like a store of designers that exclusively are working with one-offs, and they're actually just sustainable designers.
Thank you very much.